What's up, guys? Welcome to Mets Off Day Live. I'm your host, Niki Lattarulo. Today, I am joined by SNY's Danny Abriano and The Athletic's Tim Britton. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. After a brutal 2-13 stretch, the Mets finally won their first series since July, taking down the Mariners in the Little League Classic, snapping a 5-game losing streak. Danny, I'll start with you. Are you feeling better, worse, or the same as you were a couple weeks ago when they were losing a lot of games in a row?
It's hard not to feel better. It was a really feel-good win last night, a good series win over Seattle. The rotation is starting to stabilize. Nolan McLean gave them a really nice jolt on Saturday. Offense is starting to come around, led by the Fab Four, who are all hitting at the same time again. And, you know, as bad as the recent stretch was, they lost 7 one-run games during that, so they were bad. The rotation was bad. The bullpen blew a lot of leads. But there was some really unlucky randomness to it, and it was just not going to go on for much longer. But it's nice that they finally stopped the bleeding.
Tim, how about you? Are you feeling better, worse, or just thinking maybe this is a fluke? You have to see more wins here.
It's hard not to feel better than we did this time last week when they were coming off a winless week. There were some disappointment in this week, especially the blown leads Wednesday and Thursday against Atlanta. But like Danny said, most of these losses are coming. The Mets are not getting blown out the way they were earlier in the season during that first 3-14 stretch that they had. So they've been in these games. The bullpen should stabilize over time. The lineup has really come on the last week and is starting to show kind of the potential that's expected it would be coming into the year. And they've gotten a couple of good starting pitching performances. It's not 7 shutout from anyone, but what McLean gave them Saturday, what Holmes gave them on Sunday night, those are the types of serviceable starts that the Mets need if their offense is clicking to win games.
Especially the bullpen giving some scoreless innings is all good news for the Mets. Also good news, Francisco Lindor was having a really tough stretch, starting to heat up, batting .483, 3 home runs, 7 RBIs over his last 7 games. Last night was his 5th straight multi-hit game. Danny, anything you've seen him do differently to break out of this slump, or was it just some bad luck and now finally getting the ball rolling?
There was definitely some bad luck. I mean, he didn't look great during that stretch, and he's been even streakier this year than in years past. I mean, he is a streaky guy, but he's putting the ball in play a ton recently over the last 6 games. He struck out only 1 time. He's putting balls over the wall where like the randomness of a fielder making a great play can't come into it. He's finding gaps. He's hitting balls down the line. He just looks to really be locked in right now.
This is also the 4th time in Mets history they have multiple players, 20-plus home runs and stolen bases in a season. The last one, David Wright and Carlos Beltran in 2007. This is Soto's first season with 20 stolen bases. Soto leading the lead in walks has many people saying Mendoza should consider moving him to the leadoff spot. Tim, is that something you're interested in seeing him do?
Look, we've seen teams explore the possibilities of the leadoff spot more. Shohei Ohtani went 50-50 as a leadoff hitter last year. Aaron Judge has led off at times for the Yankees. But I think Juan Soto is a perfect modern-day number 2 hitter. And you've got 2 guys in Lindor and even Brandon Nimmo who can fill that leadoff role in his place. So I think starting the way they have lately with Lindor, Soto, Alonso is probably their best alignment. And now that they're starting to find a little bit of offensive rhythm, I wouldn't want to mess with that at the moment.
Danny, what about you? Would you want to see him in that 1 spot?
No, I agree. I think he's good in the number 2 spot. The on base is great, but I think it's better to have him in a spot where there are more runners on for him. He's starting to look more comfortable again. So I would just leave him where he is.
So the top of the lineup starting to finally put things together. The bottom of the order had a really great night last night, especially Mark Vientos, big game, home run, 4 RBIs. He hasn't seen too much playing time with Brett Baty being the consistent option. They're also trying to get Ronnie Mauricio in there. Tim, do you like how Carlos Mendoza has handled the young third baseman and getting them all in there as much as possible?
I don't know that anyone with the Mets really likes the scenario right now where they've got, the old adage with quarterbacks, if you got 2, you got none. And the Mets kind of have 3 third basemen. It doesn't really feel like they have any one that they're leaning on. And you want to get that rectified between now and October. So I think it's been tough. None of them have hit left-handers consistently enough to run a normal platoon. Ideally, you'd be like Brett Baty against righties, Mark Vientos against lefties. You get Mauricio some time spelling Marte at DH, and it could work out that way, but none of them have hit left-handers well enough to really justify that kind of playing time arrangement. So they're just trying to find the hot hand. And the other problem is that Vientos has probably the highest offensive potential and the worst glove. It's the opposite for Mauricio. So it's been tough for them to figure out a balance, but I do think that is something that they need to figure out between now and the start of the postseason.
Yeah, speaking of the postseason, I mean, personally for me, I think if you have Vientos in the lineup, he's the guy that can add the spark if he's hitting well. I think he's like the biggest difference maker out of those guys. But Danny, do we think the front office is just like waiting for one of them to break out, or is it time that they should pick their option and stick with them and hope that they can find the rhythm for the postseason?
I mean, like Tim said, I think they're just kind of in a tough spot. They got a lot of bodies and not enough playing time, and there's really no perfect option. I think in an ideal world, Vientos really starts to heat up power-wise, and I think having the DH spot to use also frees them up to mix and match a little bit more, but that's complicated too because you're trying to get playing time from Marte. Winker seems like an afterthought, like maybe he's not going to come back this year, so we'll see how that goes. But as we saw last night, I mean, Vientos' power, especially his opposite field power, can be a difference maker. We saw it last year in the postseason. So maybe in an ideal world, either Beatty or Mauricio heats up and takes third, and you have Vientos as that DH guy to lean on for power.
So you mentioned power. We know Francisco Alvarez is another guy that has crazy power when he's on. He was having such a great season since being called back up, but he did hurt his thumb sliding into second base last night on a double, tried to stay in for that inning, but then did come out and didn't catch the next inning. Mendoza said he did travel back to New York. He will get an MRI. Tim, given his injury history, especially with the hands, are you concerned about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be. Like, Alvarez hitting his stride was what was really changing the look of this lineup over the last week, giving it, we've talked so much about the Fab Four, and Jeff McNeil's kind of the fringe fifth guy. Now, Alvarez would add a sixth to that. That's 2/3 of your lineup looking pretty good. Alvarez has had the hand issues. They've been on the left hand the last 2 years, the thumb last year in LA that he hurt, and the hamate bone in spring training of this year. But we saw how much that hand injury in spring really threw off his swing, the mechanical changes he was trying to make. And it took him until that stint down in the minor leagues in late June and early July to find what he wanted offensively. And so that's why the Mets are, I think, reasonably concerned about this, to see, he wanted to stay in the game, but you could see from the moment that happened, he was just flexing that right hand and holding it. He was actually showing it to Eugenio Suarez at third base when he was standing there in that inning. So it did not surprise me that while he stayed on the bases that inning, that he was not bag out to catch the eighth.
Like, please, no, he was doing so well. Danny, do you think he should take some time off, even if he is cleared, to make sure he's fully healthy and nothing gets worse with only a couple more months left in the season?
I mean, I think it depends on the severity. He's going for that MRI, and then we'll find out something maybe today, maybe tomorrow before the game. But, I mean, I wouldn't have him take time off just for the sake of it. Obviously, he struggled mightily earlier this season, and he's looked like a different player since coming back up. But if he has confidence in the thumb and in the hand, I see no reason to sit him down, especially with the way he's hitting, and especially with the way Luis Torrens has struggled offensively when playing in Alvarez's place.
Let's switch gears to another young guy. Nolan McLean made his debut and actually looked so sharp and so good, electric in that debut. 5 1/3 scoreless innings, 8 strikeouts. Tim, what made him so dominant in his MLB debut?
Yeah, it's the thing that evaluators have pointed to for a long time with McLean. It's his elite ability to spin the ball. Like, you look at the way his curveball moves, the way his sweeper moves, like, it is different than what you see from a normal major leaguer. His spin rate is the highest in Major League Baseball on those pitches already. He's thrown pitches in the minor leagues that were the highest spin rate pitches anyone's thrown all year. So, that's what allows him to shape those pitches differently. He's really good at manipulating it. It's really impressive for his relative lack of experience. We always talk about Jacob deGrom didn't have a lot of pitching experience when he got to the major leagues. deGrom had basically an extra season's worth of reps that McLean doesn't have yet at his age. So, it's really impressive what he's been able to do at that age. It is what he's able to do with those breaking balls, and it gives him a lot of creativity to explore and match up against different types of swings.
Danny, do you think the Mets regret not bringing him up sooner, or do you think the timing of what he did in the minor leagues are just setting him up to be a key here down the stretch?
I don't think they'll ever admit regret, and it's impossible to know how he would have performed if he was called up on July 10th or July 25th. I'm in the camp that they should have been a little bit more aggressive with him. I think they should have been a little bit more aggressive overall when it came to what happened a couple of months ago or 6 weeks ago with all the bullpen games. But they can't go back in time. He's here now. I think David Stearns can be very deliberate when it comes to what he wants to see from guys before they hit the next level. I know McLean was definitely working on getting lefties out, and he struggled with that earlier this season. You could even see during his first start, he's still trying to figure out how to go about getting lefties out, and it'll be something that's a challenge for him at this level. But like Tim said, he looked great. I mean, the stuff plays. He knows what to do with it. He looked calm. He looked composed. He let that smile come across his face after his behind the back double play. So whether or not they regret it, can't say, but he's here now and he looks great.
Yeah, the behind the back play was something you don't expect to see in an MLB debut. Tim, the fans had been calling for McLean or Sproat to come up. Do you think seeing how well he did in his debut increases the chances of Sproat getting called up sooner rather than later?
It's certainly going to increase the clamor from the fan base, right? That they see the one guy come up and do that well. Maybe the other guys can do just as well. I think the Mets, Sproat is still very much on their radar. They've got to sort through some things with their pitching staff. They want to do with that expanded roster in September. Their bullpen is kind of locked in with at least those 7 guys. Whether they want to make a switch at the back end of that the last couple guys in that bullpen, because they don't have the optionality. They have to decide, is Frankie Montas a part of this team going forward long term through the rest of the season, or do they want to replace him at some level? Sproat is kind of next in line at the AAA level. Jonah Tong is there now as well, but I think Sproat could give them that other extra boost if they feel like they need it in their starting rotation.
You mentioned Jonah Tong. He's now up at AAA through 5 2/3 scoreless innings with 9 strikeouts in his AAA debut. Danny, any chance we could see him make his big league debut this season? And is that something you would want to see him do, help this pitching staff down the stretch?
There's always a chance. I'd be surprised. They kind of slow played him. He was dominating in AA. It was like a man amongst boys, and it still took them until August to get him up in AAA. So I think it would take utter dominance from Tong in AAA, which is possible. We saw him go and shove during his first start there, and it would probably also take some injuries at the big league level, which the Mets don't want to see. But is there a chance? Sure. But I think this is a guy who you'll see make an impact in 2026 and not this year.
Someone else that could make his way back to the Mets soon, Tyler Megill, made a rehab start for AA Binghamton, striking out 9 in 3 1/3. Tim, would you prefer to see Megill return as a starter, or do you think he's someone that could more help as a multi-inning reliever for the Mets right now?
Yeah, I think in a perfect world, Megill would get back in time for the Mets to use him as a 6th starter as they enter the stretch where they play, I think, 16 consecutive days coming up soon at the end of August. Have him in that role, and then as the roster's expanded to September, maybe you make a call whether Megill slides into the bullpen, whether he replaces someone in that starting rotation, or whether he replaces Montas in the pen. I think those are the kind of things they've got to juggle between now and the start of September, and seeing just where Tyler is. That was a huge step forward, that rehab start on Sunday. He looked really sharp. This is a guy who, in April and early May, was one of their better starting pitchers. A guy who a lot of people thought was due for a breakout season, just kind of got sidetracked a little earlier than some of their other starters in mid-May, and a guy who could still have an impact between now and the end of the season.
The pitching staff needs some sort of boost. Maybe it's McLean and he adds that spark. But Danny, do you think Megill could be the boost that the pitching staff needs, especially with some of the starters or most of the starters struggling to get into the 6th inning?
He's a really tantalizing option, but also he can be a little bit confounding at times. He's got really, really good stuff. He's got a fastball that can hit 100. So I'd be interested to see how it plays up in a bullpen role. But like Tim said, it's really, really packed in the pen right now. Another thing with Megill, though, if the Mets really can't find a spot for him, if they don't want to go to a 6-man, he does have options remaining, so they could return him from his rehab assignment and option him to Syracuse. But we'll just see how it goes. Obviously, he looked fantastic in that rehab outing. So it's good to have him down there as an option.
We're going to talk about the bullpen again in just a second, but let's switch gears to Pete Alonso. We know he passed Darryl Strawberry, Mets all-time home run leader. He did sign a 2-year contract in the offseason, but we know he can opt out at the end of this season. Tim, do you expect Alonso to opt out? And if he does, do you think it would be more about increasing the pay or looking for a longer-term deal?
Yes to all of those questions. Yeah, I think barring a serious injury, Pete Alonso is going to opt out. The contract was designed for him to opt out. Really, unless he had got hurt or had a really bad season, he was going to opt out from the start of the year. And obviously, he's had a better campaign in 2025 than he had in either of 23 or 24. The other big thing that's changed is Vladimir Guerrero Jr. signed a 14-year, $500 million contract earlier this season, kind of reset the market for first basemen. So, is Alonso in Guerrero's class? Probably not. He's going to be 5 years older than Guerrero was when he signed the deal. So, but that's not going to stop Scott Boras from using that as another peg in a first base market that had kind of stagnated for a while. Alonso getting $30 million was a good step forward for first baseman, but he didn't get the long-term deal he wanted. So I think he's looking for the kind of 5-6 year deal at $24 million would be the salary for next year. That as a base, trying to build off of that going forward. Whether the Mets are the team that gives that to him, whether he's able to land that in a way he couldn't last year, that's going to be an interesting story all winter.
Danny, do you agree with that? Maybe 5-6 year, $20-something million contract.
I mean, Boras will probably look for 7 or 8, but I mean, I think 4, 5, 6, around 25 to 30 AAVs is kind of where he's going to come in. I don't think there's that monster deal out there for Pete. Like, we know that Vlad signed the big deal. He's a lot younger, better overall hitter, I think, than Pete. It would have been a different story if Pete stayed red hot, as he was the first few months of the season, but he's going to be coming off a pretty good campaign. We'll just see if it's a fit. I think he wants to stay. I think in an ideal world, the Mets bring him back, and he's a fan favorite. He broke the home run record. He's highly, highly valuable as an offensive piece. But I think if someone blows the Mets out of the water, they're not going to go 6-7 years. They're not going to go crazy high for him. So we'll see how it shakes out.
Tim, do you think because he broke that home run record, he'll be more willing to stay? Or now that he checked that box, he just wants the biggest, longest contract he could get?
I think it, like Danny said, I think it's his preference to stay. But like we saw last year, I mean, the Mets played pretty hardball with him over the course of the winter. They said basically go out, see what you can get, and then come back and we'll talk. And that big offer was not out there for him. There was that weekend, I think in December last year, it was like every other team that needed a first baseman acquired a first baseman who was not Pete Alonso. That left him and the Mets as kind of the marriage that we all knew was going to happen eventually by spring training. We'll see if those other teams have changed their evaluation of him. He is a year older. The Mets themselves don't have kind of the built-in backup plan that they claimed they had last year with Vientos and Beatty. They could have moved Vientos over to first base, played Beatty every day, been okay. They didn't have to go out and sign someone else ahead of Alonso so they could afford to be patient with him. That's an interesting dynamic this year. They've got 2 DHs who are going to hit the free agent market. So they've got some spots open that they need to fill. And I don't think they can wait until mid-February to sign Alonso the way they were able to last year.
And also to note, his home run record now, 254, is not that many home runs. There is a chance if he leaves, a guy like Soto, who's going to be there for a long time, or Lindor, can pass and be the new holder of that title. But Danny, from Steve Cohen's perspective, do you push to have him a Met for life, or do you think he and David Stearns keep the emotions out of it when negotiating?
I think Cohen's going to let Stearns do his thing. I mean, we've seen in the past that Cohen can kind of covet certain players and put his imprint on that. We saw that with the Correa deal that fell apart. We saw it with Soto. In the case of Alonso, I mean, it's a tough spot. I mean, the fans love him. He seemingly loves it in New York. Cohen has the money to really outbid anyone if he wants to do that. But they also don't have, like Tim said, they don't really have somebody to slide in there. I mean, Ryan Clifford maybe is that guy at some point in 2026 or 27, but he's got a lot of swing and miss in his game. You don't know about that. But would I be surprised if Cohen is in Stearns' ear saying, I'd prefer to have this guy back? No, but I don't think he's going to force the issue if the deal gets beyond where Stearns thinks it should be.
Another guy that has a player option after this year is Edwin Diaz. We know he's also a coveted Met. Everyone loves him. But Tim, do you expect him to opt out? And would the Mets try to commit a long-term deal for a guy that's 32 years old already?
Yeah, I mean, I think he'll opt out again, just like Alonso. I think you look at the closer market for this offseason, Diaz is going to be the best closer available. Devin Williams, who might have come into the year contending for that title, certainly hasn't had the type of season he wanted to have. Helsley hasn't had the type of season he wanted to have. So it's basically going to be Diaz, Robert Suarez, Aroldis Chapman. And Diaz, since he signed that last deal, Josh Hader has gotten a little bit more than him. So it wouldn't surprise me if, Diaz, I think the preference for him to remain in New York is strong. it wouldn't stun me if he opts out, and then even before he hits free agency, they're able to work out something longer term with him, a 4-year deal, something like that. So I think Diaz has proven himself to be one of those closers, one of those relievers you don't feel as anxious about investing in long term, giving that kind of 4 or 5 year deal. So it would not surprise me if there was a reunion early in November between those two sides.
Last season, I think he made fans a little nervous when he would come into games. This season, everyone seems a little more calm when he comes into games in the ninth inning. Danny, do you think the Mets made it a priority to bolster their bullpen at the deadline with the thought maybe he would opt out after the season?
Those guys are rentals, so I think they just simply wanted to improve their bullpen, and I think they envisioned a super bullpen, and it hasn't happened yet. Rogers has been a little bit up and down. We know that Helsley has had his struggles here. Is it out of the realm of possibility that the Mets re-sign Ryan Helsley and let Edwin Diaz walk? No, it's not something I would predict. But I think this was really about this season and about if they make the playoffs, you have hopefully this lockdown 7, 8, 9 at the end of games.
You mentioned Ryan Helsley and his kind of up and down start so far for the Mets. 8 appearances, 3 losses, allowed 9 runs, an ERA over 7. He did throw a scoreless inning last night, which is kind of a relief for the Mets and the Mets fans. Tim, why do you think he's had trouble finding his footing the last couple of weeks since being in New York?
Yeah, I think the thing that stood out from people I've talked to is that he's actually throwing too many strikes, which you don't think of with a reliever, especially someone who throws 101. But the problem is that too many of Helsley's 2-strike pitches have been in the strike zone. That fastball that he throws toward the top of the zone has to be above the zone rather than gettable to a hitter up in the zone. And the slider he's thrown has stayed in the bottom of the zone rather than getting under the swings of hitters. So I think if he just fine tunes his command a little bit, his control is fine. He's in the strike zone. Getting the command, getting those pitches exactly where he wants it to be will be the difference between a lights out Ryan Helsley in the 8th inning and the one we've seen so far in pinstripes.
Yeah, last night he kind of got back to his footing. Do you think, Danny, it was a sign that he's back on the right track, or maybe the Mets shouldn't use him in high leverage situations until they see a couple of consistent performances in a row?
It looked to me like he's starting to turn the corner. Pretty much everything went wrong that could go wrong in his appearances on Thursday and Friday. So it was a matter of time before he looked better. And, Mendoza has to keep using him. The Mets need him to be the guy they traded for if they want to get to where they want to go. He looked totally fine to me against the Mariners. He struck out 2, worked around the 2-out walk. He's got electric stuff. He just needs to harness it a little bit better. And again, the Mets need him. So you can't go burying him on the depth chart, especially with Garrett struggling a little bit. Rogers hasn't been totally locked down. They need to keep trotting him out there and just let him work it out.
It's also a much different environment in St. Louis when your team is not in the playoff race versus coming to New York. We know the stadiums are different, the fans are different. So maybe just a little bit of an adjustment period. Hopefully it gets back on track sooner rather than later. Let's look ahead. The Mets trail the Phillies now by 5 games in the NL East standings. They take on the Nationals, Braves, and then the Phillies in their next 3 series. Tim, what do they need to do differently this go around against the Braves? Because we thought they were going to be fine, and then they struggled against them in the last series.
Yeah, they've got to handle the bottom part of the Atlanta order better than they did in the series at Citi Field last week. That was, Atlanta's order this year is not as deep as we've seen it in the past. They have Ronald Acuna Jr. back now, so that lengthens it out a little bit. But, Austin Riley's been out. Matt Olson's not having the type of year he's usually had. So especially that 7, 8, 9, we saw David Peterson, particularly in his start, he walked the 6, 8, 9 batters in that one inning that really got away from him. If they control the bottom of that Atlanta order, when it turns over to the good hitters in the top half, you don't have as much traffic on the bases. You can kind of pitch around guys then, rather than getting yourself into trouble the way the Mets did at Citi Field last week.
And they have the Nationals coming up first. And I know the Nationals people are going to overlook, but you can't overlook anyone in this league because we've seen them overlook people and then lose those games. Danny, do you think the bullpen or the starting pitching is more important for the Mets in this whole stretch?
I think it's the starting pitching. The trickle-down effect when they don't perform is really dangerous. And we've seen what happens. You overuse your relievers. You get into situations where guys are being pulled after 3 1/3, 3 2/3, 4 innings. They need stabilization, and they got that the last week. Cody Senga looked pretty good. Clay Holmes looked really good last night. Peterson's the one who's been a little bit iffy still, but I would expect him to bounce back, and he gets a series opener on Tuesday. But again, starting pitching needs to stabilize. It's started to turn the corner, but they need to do a little bit better, get a little more length.
Tim, do you agree? Bullpen, starting pitching, who are you most thinking is crucial in this stretch?
Yeah, well, I think in like a playoff series, you might say the bullpen, but with this much time left in the regular season, Danny's right that if your starters are consistently going 3 and 4 rather than 5 and 6, you put too much strain on the bullpen. The Mets built that bullpen with the idea that most of those guys are 1 inning guys. When you start having to extend Reed Garrett 1+, you start having to throw Edwin Diaz for 6 outs on Saturday the way they did. That's not a great recipe to be in your best position come October. So they need those starters to pitch the way they have the last 3 or 4 games, where they're getting at least into the 6th inning with a chance to win the game.
Now, if the pitchers are going into at least the 6th inning, the hitters also have to do their job and put some runs on the board. Danny, who in this lineup do you need to see a big series or a stretch from right now?
I would love to see it from Vientos. He looked really good last night. And again, I think he can really help them become more than just that kind of 4-headed monster. We know that we're waiting to see how Alvarez is, and he's been great lately too. So in a world where Alvarez isn't seriously hurt, the top 4 guys keep hitting, and they get production from Vientos, they could be a really dangerous lineup.
Now, I mentioned that the Mets are 5 games behind the Phillies for the NL East. Tim, is their series against the Phillies a must-win if they want to stay in the NL East race? Because 5 games doesn't seem like too much, but if you lose that series, you're down far more games.
Yeah, I think, the Mets have 7 games left with the Phillies. This series is the one at Citi Field. They've got 4 in Philly in early September. Looking at it, you probably need to go 5-2 in those 7 games. So it's definitely a lot easier to do that if you win 2 out of 3, maybe even sweep at home. So I think, you look at the path. There's a pathway for the Mets to win the division if they don't win this series or if they only win 2 out of 3. But it becomes a lot easier if they start to cut into that deficit earlier on rather than trying to save it for, the second half of September.
A little bigger. Danny, you agree or disagree?
I missed the first part of that question, Niki. Sorry, can you repeat it?
Oh, yeah. They're now 5 games behind Philly for the NL East. Is the series against Philly a must-win in order to even have a chance at the division?
I mean, I think it's more about what they do against the Nats and the Braves. If they put themselves in position to start cutting into that lead before they even play Philly, that would be great. And if you win 2 or 3, you sweep them, then you really put yourselves in position to get back in it. The goal here should be being within 2 or 3 when September starts, and then you see what happens. But yeah, I think a big series against them at Citi would go a long way.
I think, in my opinion, if it gets any larger than 5 games, it's going to be really hard to dig out of that hole. But like you mentioned, David Peterson on the mound Tuesday, he was the one starter that was getting past 6 innings, but he struggled his last outing, only went 3 1/3, giving up 6 runs against the Braves, hoping to turn that around on Tuesday in Washington. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. That's all for Mets Post Game Live. For Danny and Tim, I'm Niki Lattarulo. We will see you back here next time.